do you make of the budget more broadly?
I mean, it's surprisingly more progressive than we would have expected. And what's interesting as well is that's not just in the details. For example, when they did the budget last year, whilst it was good that they raised some taxes, like it was good that they increased capital gains tax slightly at the last budget. And I think that whilst it wasn't the best tax to raise, increasing national insurance for employers at least made sure that there wasn't real terms cuts in unprotected departments, as was predicted by the IFS before the election. As Stephen Flynn pointed out loads and loads of times in the run-up to the election, that if they didn't raise taxes, those cuts were happening. So it was a real sleight of hand that they did in 2024 to justify tax rises, not by saying it would be good if these government departments didn't have cuts, and instead said, oh, there's this black hole, we've got to raise taxes, oh no, right? That was the level of subterfuge the Labour Party were engaging in last year to appeal to these kind of middle income Mondeo man style voters that they wanted to win over in the run up to the election. And they essentially had to hoodwink into being accepting of tax rises by painting the previous government as overspending far too much. We have to raise taxes to be able to wipe the slate clean and fix the foundations. All that rhetoric in the run up to this budget, surprisingly absent. I guess because you can't get away with lying more than once. You actually have to be somewhat truthful with the electorate. Now, I think lots of people who voted Labour probably weren't expecting something like this, given what they were saying in the run-up to the election. But the language we're seeing now is people like Keir Starmer saying this is going to be a Labour budget with Labour principles. Rachel Reeves made a very impassioned argument to LBC about why child poverty is not just bad holistically for the children, but bad for the economy and broader society, which was arguments that the left were making when MPs were removed from the Parliamentary Labour Party, had the whip removed for voting for an SNP amendment to do the same thing that Rachel Reeves is making the arguments for now. So that's a big rhetorical change in promising to be redistributive, promising to do things that we're seeing now that impact high property wealth, which is something that we've all been calling for here on the left. Maybe so they wanted a bigger extent of how those taxes were being implemented, and a small £600 million change is very, very small fry in the grand scheme of things, but a broader change in council tax I will be happy with. But this language is being changed for one very specific reason. It's losing votes to the Green Party. They're losing votes to Zack Polanski's Green Party, and not a small amount of votes either. The Greens are level with the Labour Party in loads of polls. When you look at the crosstabs of these polls and you look at polls of the Labour membership, they're losing twice as many of their voters to the Greens as they are to Reform, and they're losing as many voters to the Liberal Democrats as they're losing to Reform UK. Now, I'm not saying that the Liberal Democrats are necessarily a progressive party, but their communications have changed. In the run-up to the election, there were very kind of orange book style policies. They were very much kind of marketing themselves at the same kind of voters that Labour were going after in the kind of shires where they were winning over Tory voters. But given that there's now a kind of more Beveridgeite wing of the Lib Dems that are in ascendancy, like Josh Babarinde being more kind of prominent in terms of their communications, they're now going after Labour by saying you should be taxing banks and these financial transactions and big social media giants. Now, again, small fry in the terms of the actual policy itself, and their policy perspectives isn't particularly progressive, but it's that angle that they're coming from that's meaning people are moving away from Labour. But broadly, it's the Greens that they're afraid of and the rise of Zack Polanski. They don't have a choice other than trying to appeal to voters that they're losing, because it's not about trying to stop the hemorrhaging of votes to Reform to try and win an election. They're scared of their entire base falling out. People who voted Labour for generation after generation after generation are leaving Labour in their droves, not just in the membership and not just in the Labour movement, but they're refusing to vote Labour and they're voting for the Green Party or other left-wing parties because of Labour's approach to the welfare state, their approach to broader tax and spend, and their broader approach to how they holistically see the economy. The issue, of course, you'll be asking is, will this work? Will this win back those voters? And the answer, of course, is no, it won't. Again, I'm happy to see these changes. I think the overall raising tax and spending that on more welfare is broadly a good thing. Target at people who live in quote-unquote mansions, all you want, I'm all for it. And I'm glad to see these changes. But I don't think it will win over any of these people that they're losing to vote parties that are ostensibly to the left or realistically to the left in the case of the Green Party, because no one believes Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves when they say these things. People are used to being pandered to in terms of where they think is most electorally viable for them. They did it in the run-up to the election, they did it just after the election, and they're doing it again now. We don't believe that these people broadly have an interest in keeping the welfare state in the position that it's in, given they tried to cut the welfare state earlier this year. Just in the same way that Reform UK voters don't believe that Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves have all become massive patriots overnight because Yvette Cooper goes on about the different kinds of bunting with Union Jacks on that she has in her household that no one and their mum believes that she actually does because it looks like pandering. If they had a vision, if they broadly went to the electorate last year and said, this is where we want to take the country, this is our prospectus for government, this is where we want to see the country at the end of the 5 to 10 years or whatever it is, based upon this set of principles, this ideological framework, people would buy into it. But they didn't do that. They said, I guess we'll grow the economy. And that was it. That was their prospectus for government, was the highest sustained growth in the G7, which isn't a mission. It's not a goal. It's just a part of the policy framework that doesn't have any ideological point to it. How are you going to economy? Who are you going to grow the economy for? And when they keep chopping and changing where they think the ideological winds are going, no one is going to believe them. No one will believe them in the slightest. So it won't work. The other thing I would also like to point out is that in the run-up to the election, everyone kept saying, who was on the kind of more liberal side of politics, the soft left, the centrists, the social liberals, they were all saying, we have to vote Labour. You have to show your support for the Labour Party. Otherwise, you'll wind up with a reform government. Now they're in government, we're going to stare down the barrel of Nigel Farage as Prime Minister anyway. And second of all, it's this refusal to vote Labour. It's this withholding of the votes from the Labour Party, whether on principle because you don't feel represented by them, which is lots of the cases of people who are less politically engaged, or people who are very politically engaged, like probably plenty of people in the Novara audience, who don't want to vote Labour because we don't want to be seen to be giving these people our vote when they take it for granted. They give up all of this leverage in terms of what the Labour Party should stand for, in terms of what we expect from a Labour government. And the Labour Party said, well, if you're going to give us your vote forever, we don't need to pander to it. You have nowhere else to go, quote unquote. Now they're in power, they're doing things, or they did things up to now, which were against the interests of that base. People have gone, oh, well, there's a Green Party over here. There is somewhere else that we can go. We will walk through the open door. Remember what Keir Starmer said? The door is open and you can leave. That was his explicit promise to people in terms of how he changed the Labour Party and what he wanted to see. They've left in their droves. They've shaken off the fleas. And now they're having to win these people back by offering them policy that isn't just growing the economy, being the adults in the rooms, being the conservative neoliberal consensus, but done more proficiently, done more competently, right? And whilst they're more competent than the Tories, they're engaging in capital spending that the Tories never did, and that's a good thing. Unless they actually show people who support the Labour movement as an ideological background, as an ideological principle, and the principle of social democracy or democratic socialism, unless they show people that that's what they believe in, rather than pander to the people who they think have those values, they'll never win over anybody. And no matter how progressive they are in this budget, I think that for Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves specifically, that ship has sailed. People have already made their minds up. And all it will do is make people negatively polarized to these policy announcements because they're coming from people that they don't trust. If, for example, in the May elections, it looks like they're going to get destroyed from all sides. In their northern homelands, they're going to get destroyed by Reform UK. In the cities of this country, they're going to get destroyed by the Green Party. And it will be the end of Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves' tenure in the positions of power as they get swiftly regicided by the Labour membership because of the abysmal failure that they've made in defending their councils, defending them in the Senate and in Holyrood. There'll have to be a reckoning as to a vision that will be implemented by whichever leader replaces Keir Starmer. And that person can wipe the slate clean. That person can make an ideological volte-face and say, this was the end of the Starmer and Reeves period. I'm sorry we did that to people. I promise we'll make amends. This is my vision for the country. But any chopping and changing that happens now in response to polling from Reeves and Starmer will be totally unbelievable because they were never believable in the first place and they never set out why they were doing it in the first place.
I think there's a lot of wisdom to that. But I mean, my job at Novara is to obviously make sense of what's happening. And I have to say, compare this budget to anything from the Tories over the last 14 years. I'm not going to vote Labour the next election, by the way. And I didn't vote for Labour in the last general election. It is just a completely different kettle of fish. It is so much more competent and marginally more progressive. Marginally. It's so much more competent. And if you were a centre-right person with vaguely progressive views, and you didn't want the country to collapse in the next 20 years, I don't know why you wouldn't vote Labour. How I view Labour now, right? A moderately sensible centre-right party. That's not my politics, but there's a market for it. And I would say that what they're doing now, and it is extraordinary that you have a party of government with this huge majority, a bigger majority than Margaret Thatcher ever won. They are now being driven in terms of policies at a budget by a political party with 4 MPs. That is absolutely on the money, Helena, and it's absolutely happening. It is extraordinary. But I do feel like getting rid of the 2-child benefit cap, introducing a mansions tax, this kind of stuff, nodding to this kind of mood music, is the difference between 25% and 15%. I do feel like the Liz Kendall ultra headbanger, Blairism redux, let's do ID cards all over again thing, would genuinely wipe the party out. And I suspect some people are beginning to recognize that. Let's stick with this story for just a minute. Ahead of tomorrow, Labour's polling in London has collapsed, which perhaps explains why that 2-child benefit cap is about to go. New polling by Savanta has Labour on 32% in the capital. That's the lowest on record. Meanwhile, Reform are on 23%. That's ahead of the Tories, who are on 20%. Elsewhere, the Lib Dems are on 11% and the Greens are on 10%. Labour's backing in the capital has plummeted from 43%, which was what they got at the last general election in July 2024. And with local elections in every single borough across the city and next May, the party is very much fighting a rearguard action. Helena, the 2-child benefit cap is particularly salient in larger cities, particularly salient in London, amongst younger families, often people of non-white heritage. That is Labour's bedrock in London, Leeds, Manchester, Liverpool, precisely the places which, when you look at the projections for, maybe the Greens picking up 50 or 60 seats, that's where those seats are. Just to go back to your point about Zack Polanski being the reason we're now seeing the elimination of the 2-child benefit cap, what other policies do you think the Greens might influence over the next 12 months? And what do you make of that polling? Is the reality for Labour in London actually lower than what Savanta is suggesting?
I mean, things will have to come to a head when it actually gets down to those council elections. There's obviously quite a while until we see these things actually have the electoral test. There is a few months left. The impact of the budget, it remains to be seen. But I think you're right. Things like the 2-child benefit cap or the 2-child cap on universal credit, because it's specifically with regards to universal credit, I mean, it will probably increase a lot of living standards for these larger families, which is where basically all of the new levels of child poverty have come from. And that's not my words. Those are the words of Torsten Bell, who's now a junior Treasury Minister, who was somebody who was defending the 2-child benefit cap when they were getting whipped away from MPs, and against it before the election, before he was selected as an MP through a very, very definitely 100% democratic CLP process that get him put in the seat in the first place, So there is a total justification electorally for them wanting to win over these kind of families in London. When it comes to other policies, maybe they might lose over kind of the more affluent people of those kind of constituencies that have more progressive social views. Because you tend to do, if you live in these kind of multicultural, more metropolitan areas, right? There's a big kind of distinction politically between urban and rural areas in this country. And they'll be put off by some of the economic policies that might affect them. If you live in a big London townhouse, seeing your council tax go up might also negatively polarize you, because it doesn't matter whether your overall income is higher or not. Those prices have been an asset value that's increased over the last 30 years. I think it's fair to do that. They might not see it the same way. And with Labour retreating on some social issues, that might be something that wins them over to the Liberal Democrats, a party like that are more centre-right on the economy and that are socially progressive in the way that the Labour Party just aren't. There's also the issue of Gaza, insofar as you look at these urban communities, and one thing that has been a real sticking point for the multicultural communities in this country, where there is a very large Muslim population, a very large kind of internationalist ideological base point for these people who live in these societies, who don't subscribe to American unipolar international hegemony, because they're people who take note of international politics. Doesn't matter how many 2-child benefit caps you get rid of. It doesn't matter how much more generous you make the welfare state. They've seen a government enable genocide. They have seen Keir Starmer say that Israel has the right to cut off food and fuel and water from starving civilians, right? They have seen the increase in arms sales to higher than they've ever been in decades under this Labour government, despite them saying that they were going to remove some arms licenses. And no amount of tinkering with economic policy will bring these people back now that that red line has been crossed, now that that Rubicon has been crossed for the Labour Party. And it's one of my red lines. I mean, you said yourself you're not voting for Labour at the next election, even though both of us agree that the measures being taken in this budget are sensible measures, right? The things that any Conservative party on the continent would do because they live in a more normal political system where people accept that sometimes taxes do just have to go up if you have an aging population and an expensive pension contributions bill. You know, they expect those things to happen. Centre-right parties would do this on the continent in the way the Conservatives haven't done in this country, not to the same extent, right? But it doesn't matter how competent that budget is. If you've seen the government, as we all have, and like one of the red lines that we all have, enable a genocide, that you can't see these small changes because they're good changes, but they're small changes. Win that vote back. I think that ship has long sailed, and it would. And again, I think it would need a new leader with a new approach to the UK-Israel relationship to win these voters back. Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for membership. It's just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.